Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. For those of you who have never been here before, we do a long-form political commentary on the program, addressing many of the issues that you've heard about with a different take. In addition, on every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream where we speak directly with you, giving you the opportunity to reach us during with YouTube or Facebook or Twitter, or even to call into the program and to speak with us about what your concerns are and issues that are impacting everyone in this country, sometimes internationally as well. But today we're going to be talking about something somewhat different. An issue that is international, but yet is still close at home for every American, something that's affecting everyone. In this last election, millions of votes were placed for Joe Biden. There were tens of millions of votes, though, that voted against Orange Man Bad. And throughout that entire process, China bet very heavily on this election. And they had a reason. They had a very big reason. We just didn't know it at the time. What wound up happening, as we have now heard, and what most people are talking about, right now it's December 9th at 2 a.m. in the morning. And by now, I think most people probably have heard about the video that Tucker Carlson had on his program showing an elite of China, one of their professors, was at a function speaking, and he revealed critical information about the relationship between China and America and with Joe Biden. And what we see here is in a direct translation from a November 28th speech by Professor Donsheng. I apologize if I mispronounced that. He is a professor at Renmin University in Beijing. And he was on Chinese television speaking about Wall Street, international trade, and politics. In a translation that has been checked by two different Chinese speakers, he says, in part, the Trump administration is in a trade war with us. So why can't we fix the Trump administration? Why, between 1992 in 2016, did China and the U.S. used to be able to settle all kinds of issues, no matter what kind of crises we encountered? Things were solved in no time. We fixed everything in 2 months. What is the reason? I'm going to throw out something maybe a little bit explosive here. It's just because we have people at the top of America's core inner circle of power and influence. We have our old friends. Now, I know much of the internet is been enraged, amazed, just every kind of emotion coming out about this conversation by Professor Donsheng and the video that was presented by Tucker Carlson. This video has been removed by the Chinese Communist government and is no longer available to the people of China over social media. But thankfully, in more free nations that are not socialist, like the United States, that video is still available for people to see and to hear that translation, which no news agency has disputed in its full context, though not all of them are willing to repeat it in full context. How did America get here? How can China be touting its ability to have a fix to the Trump administration being the Joe Biden administration, apparently? How can they be so confident that they are that well connected to Joe Biden and America without the presence of President Trump? Well, the answer is we go back in time. Something very few, actually no news media that I've seen so far, have been willing to do. Our first stop is going to be about the introduction of China to the World Trade Organization. Now, we're going back, and this is in the 1990s, 1993 to be exact, even though the actual introduction of China to the World Trade Organization was in December of 2001. What really created opportunity for that was in 1993. Now, in 1992, then President Clinton, Bill Clinton, had released an executive order that linked China to human rights conditions, that China would be denied the opportunity to join the rest of the world in the World Trade Organization, improving its economy and its ability to sell goods across the globe. And they had to promise to preserve Tibet and to stop putting people in prisons for international human rights violations, which we know that even today, into 2020, they have been doing en masse continuously. And the thing is that as much as that was a restriction made in 1992 by Bill Clinton, in 1993, he removed those restrictions. That was the start of the process to allow China to enter the World Trade Organization, something that would ultimately happen under President George Bush. Again, this goes to the statement that we heard from Professor Donsheng, saying that going back 30, 40 years, going back to the 1990s, the relations of China with the United States improved, that they had their friends in old places. Well, we know that it was shortly after that that the China Trade Bill was passed. That's H.R. 4444, the 106 in the 106th Congress. This was in the year 2000. A vote that was passed, and very interestingly, there were Republicans and Democrats alike that voted for this bill, both in the House and in the Senate. And in particular, one of the names, well, two of the names I want to point out in the Senate that are important are Dianne Feinstein, who voted for the bill in China, for the China bill, and also in the Senate at that time, New York Senator Chuck Schumer. These votes are critical votes, and they're very important. This allowed, in the year 2000, the ability for China to normalize its relations, and in particular its business relations, with the United States, to gain a foothold in our country. It was shortly after that that we would see that they joined the World Trade Organization, which again happened was signed into law in 2000. The China Relations Act of 2000 took place, and then 2001, China joined the World Trade Organization. It's a lot of information. Just keep up with me. I know that many people are not used to actually hearing a lot of details and seeing where our political problems of today came from and how widespread they are. It's because politicians count on the fact that you're not going to remember, that even though we have access to the internet, most people won't know where to look, and that they expect they can tell you any story and you're just going to accept it. I tell you, don't do that. And I will include links for everything I am showing you and everything I am speaking about so that you can look at this for yourself and draw your own conclusions. So this is important because once we had the China Relations Act of 2000, thanks to the efforts of the Clinton administration and followed up by the Bush administration in the 2000s, what we saw is that the Confucius Institute was able to go out throughout the rest of the world. They used the influence of the World Trade Organization to be able to use the Confucius Institute. Now, let me be very clear. The Confucius Institute is a quasi-spy agency of the Chinese Communist government that goes to colleges around the world and uses those colleges to influence students, to train them in socialism, to make them believe that China is a good player in the world, that they are great actors, that they are a benefit to the public, and socialism is a boon to the world. They have done this, and they have reached hundreds of locations, many of them in the United States. In fact, the first Confucius Institute in the United States was at the University of Maryland, and the year was 2004. That was the year that they reached everywhere, and the University of Maryland was the first campus in the United States that they were able to reach out to. Now, and I will get into this in a little bit, but the Confucius Institute, again, let me mention, has been identified by multiple countries around the world as a spy organization, and that it is used to propagate and to push out propaganda for the Chinese Communist government. They have been kicked out of a dozen countries, half a dozen countries at this time. They are under investigation currently by the United States government, and they have been removed from several colleges in the United States, although institutions like Binghamton University in New York continue to maintain it because they give a lot of money as well as spreading their influence amongst the youth of America. Now, it was in shortly after that, in 2007, we were speaking at the Voss Political Commentary, a website we maintain where we have political commentary written instead of the verbal format we have now. We had noted that it was in a conversation, actually it was December 24th of 2007, that we had a conversation with traders in New York City, and they had mentioned that, and I quote, China has the sheer manpower that will help it outperform. In many ways, it is similar to Japan of the 50s. And at that time, China had already positioned $29 billion into U.S. World economies, and they had taken a $5 billion stake in Morgan Stanley. This is a huge influence into American economy, tying the U.S. to China and reaching to individuals both at colleges and on Wall Street. One of those students that they reached out to potentially, and I cannot confirm this, may have been Eric Swalwell. Now, you may be familiar with Mr. Swalwell. He is currently a congressman from California in the California 15th. And Mr. Swalwell, back in 2002, was a member of the University of Maryland, where, as I have just noted, the Confucius Institute was busy spreading its propaganda about communism and socialism and looking to infiltrate political campaigns as well as the stock markets. It was shortly after Eric Swalwell graduated from the University of Maryland that he went on to start his political career. And we did find out that Mr. Swalwell had very strong ideas that many people would say are somewhat socialistic, as in his calls for banning or even the possession of firearms in the United States, a violation of the Second Amendment, and something that has been touted by progressives and the Democratic Socialists of America, BLM and Antifa, and other far left elements of the Democratic Party. Now, you may say to yourself, well, Mike, why is that important? Because Representative Swalwell never made it in the presidential race. He was rejected in 2019. What does that have to do with what China is saying today? Well, Eric Swalwell, as we know from Axios, who had reported this, and I want to be very clear, they came out with this, I believe it was today, that Axios has alleged, or confirmed, I should say, that China had infiltrated the Swalwell campaign. And they had used a woman by the name of Fang to be able to do so. And I lost my spot, so bear with me a moment. Here it is. So as Axios had mentioned, Representative Swalwell long ago, which isn't that long ago at all, provided information about this person whom he met more than 8 years ago and whom he hasn't seen in nearly 6 years to the FBI to protect information that might be classified. He will not participate in the story. Well, there are some things we do know, that this took place in approximately 2013, and an individual named Fang, who is a suspected agent of the Chinese government, was a known supporter of Mr. Swalwell and was able to provide him with funding and was able to provide his campaign with an intern. When the FBI notified Mr. Swalwell that they were investigating the potential problem, that's when Fang left the United States in the middle of the investigation and has never since spoken to either news media nor FBI agents. We are not sure what happened to the intern that was placed by the Chinese government through Fang into Swalwell's campaign. We would like to believe that they were removed. That's what we do know. We also know that at about that same time, in 2013, we found out that Dianne Feinstein had employed a Chinese spy in her campaigns as well, someone who had worked with her for many years. And this was an article that came out and was broken in many articles. In particular, CNN and others had spoken about this. Now, for Senator Dianne Feinstein, she made it very clear that she was unaware of this individual's presence, and that once she was made aware of it by the Department of Justice, that she removed this person from her office, although they had already been involved with her for some time. Dianne Feinstein, to be very clear, sits on the House Intelligence Committee. She has information that is absolutely critical to the safety and security of the United States. So far, we've been able to show that, and I want to be just to bring you to date, due to the actions of the Bill Clinton administration, China was able to enter into the World Trade Organization to spread its influence into businesses and the economies of the world, and specifically the United States. They parlayed that ability, that newfound ability to influence the United States, to buy assets off of the Wall Street, in Wall Street, and to invade colleges throughout the United States and the world, and begin to indoctrinate students into communism and socialism to varying degrees, as well as to begin to become involved in campaigns, generally targeting, as far as we can tell, the West Coast of America, specifically in California, where a very strong left movement exists, in getting involved in the campaign of Eric Swalwell and attaching themselves to a member of the House Intelligence Committee. That should terrify people. And that influence, we have no idea where it may have led to. But we do know that this is something that would not be unusual for Senator Dianne Feinstein, because Senator Feinstein, who did vote for China and the normalizing U.S.-China relations, as I showed you, has also gone unilaterally, and spoken to Iran and about their prospects with the United States, potentially under a different administration, not the Trump administration, but a more democratic administration. While we don't have the full details of her unsanctioned efforts to reach out to the leadership of Iran, we do know that it happened. Now, that would give anyone pause when you think about you have a House Intelligence Committee member who has been infiltrated, and who knows how much influence was placed on her by an individual that was driving her to various activities throughout her district in California and interacting with her and Chinese American citizens. It's unknown what kind of influence could have happened there. But it is troubling. And it is troubling when we think about the Confucius Institute and that they had a decades-long influence on students at universities throughout the nation. Like I've mentioned, at Binghamton University currently, and at the University of Maryland, where Mr. Swalwell attended. And this was something that was brought up in the University of Chicago, where they were complaining about this in 2013, as we had covered in our May 12th, 2020 video discussing, do American values justify funding Chinese communism in our colleges? Where I go through the problems with the Confucius Institute and how deeply it has ingrained itself in our education, our higher education systems, and also has influenced our politics. So that brings me a little bit closer to what's going on right now. Because we know that according to the Hunter Biden laptop and the admissions by associates of Hunter Biden, who Tony Bubalinsky, who confirmed all of the information found by the New York Post on the laptop, showing dubious connections to China, to the Ukraine, activities that would trouble anyone, influence peddling by Joe Biden, by Joe Biden's brother Jim, and his son Hunter. And not all news media were willing to cover that. In fact, we had several organizations like NBC News who decided that it wasn't important to tell the public about this. In fact, on October 30th, they came out and stated very clearly that they did not believe that there was evidence there. I quote, leaving aside the many questions about their provenance, the materials on the laptop, the materials offered no evidence that Joe Biden played in any role in his son's dealings in China, let alone profited from them, both news organizations concluded. Now, what they didn't say in that statement is that Joe Biden had no connection to China, that Hunter Biden had no connection to China, even though the emails clearly denoted, and Tony Bubalinsky, the business associate of the Bidens, admitted that this was a deal with China. NBC News did not want to speak about that during just before the election, and they, like Facebook, like Twitter, suppressed this information from the American public so as to not alter any election prospects. We should be troubled because we were shown a direct connection of individuals using tens of millions of dollars to buy influence and a connection to Joe Biden as he was running for president of the United States. And the major news media of our nation decided not to investigate this, not to discuss this, not to bother letting the American people know about this because it could influence their vote. If that isn't bias, I don't know what is. Many of these students, many of the journalists who had made the decision not to follow up on this, who were convinced that there could be no evidence, even though evidence had been provided, even though affidavits had been sworn to, that this did not constitute evidence. These were the same students that went to schools that had Confucius Institute organizations in them with its purpose and its goal of spreading propaganda about socialism and improving the view of China. Many of these individuals have gone on into Hollywood. And in Hollywood, we see a desperate attempt to include China in a very positive light in all movies over the last 3 years because of its marketing prowess, because of the economy of China, promoted by both Wall Street and Hollywood and supported by many political officials. It would seem the Confucius Institute has been very successful. It seems that the inclusion in the World Trade Organization and the efforts of the Clinton administration were fruitful for China, allowing them to make many friends and to be involved in many organizations at the very top. Something that we heard from Professor Donsheng. And that top included individuals in the highest levels of American politics. The House Intelligence Committee, members of the House of Representatives. We're talking about, excuse me, not the House Intelligence, it's the Senate Intelligence Committee. Sorry, it's 2 a.m. Under Dianne Feinstein. And now we have connections between the Bidens and Joe Biden, the American presidency. This should trouble anyone and should have triggered an investigation immediately. But what we were told and what we found out, as we heard from the BBC, America's friends across the pond, just 6 days ago, on December 3rd, were noting that the Chinese were setting up attempts to influence the Biden organization based on the claims of Biden being president-elect. And in this article, they go on to mention that in July, the State Department also closed China's consulates in Houston, Texas, and accusing Beijing of stealing intellectual property. The U.S. State Department had said that it would only welcome Chinese students who do not further the Chinese Communist Party's goals of military dominance. Again, this is going to the Confucius Institute and the influence of spies in America. Beijing, according to the BBC, hit back by accusing the U.S. of racial discrimination, a tactic that in 2020 was used rampantly for every issue that the far left did not like, that the Democratic Socialists of America as an organization did not like, as Antifa and BLM, organizations that all promote and support socialism. That was their claim against everything that they didn't like. But we know, as our friends over in England mentioned, this is something that China is doing on purpose. They are pushing back against President Trump and influencing President-elect, potentially, Biden, in getting their foothold in an individual that they have connections to through his son, Hunter Biden. It gets worse because it was just December 7th, now 2 days ago, that we had foreignpolicy.com, a noted organization looking at international politics, stating that Biden thinks he's tough, but he's not. He's complacent. And they detail in many, many ways how Joe Biden is just missing the boat on China. Not even detailing his influence by Hunter Biden, but just in his bad decisions of policy and his misunderstanding of the goals of China. And all of that, therefore, brings us to the Chinese professor boasting of top operatives in the U.S. in the core inner circle. I've gone through a lot of information, and I hope you followed me with this. It's information you're not going to get from anywhere else. The major U.S. news media is not willing to address this. They're not willing to tell you how China has gotten so much influence over the United States, how socialism has been pushed in the United States and changing our generations and our livelihood, our ability to function as a nation, both in terms of economy and in terms of our society. But we will. And we can tell you that Joe Biden is the top. He is the reward. He is the cherry on top for the investment that China has made for a long-term strategy to build up its influence in America, to change the minds of the youth who then become the leaders of business and politics. Now, I am not going to say that Eric Swalwell was directly influenced by the Confucius Institute or the efforts of spies from China. I'm not going to say that Dianne Feinstein was influenced by spies from China as she was on the Senate Intelligence Committee. But I will tell you that it could have potentially happened. I can tell you that potentially hundreds of thousands of students were influenced and had their ideas, their views of socialism changed by the Confucius Institute. And that American economy was pivoted in favor of China after the WTO, the World Trade Organization, allowed them in, and that allowed them to enter into U.S. politics. And Dianne Feinstein and Chuck Schumer helped to usher that in, voting for this bill. I'm troubled. I am deeply troubled. I think we all should be deeply troubled when other nations and in groups and organizations that are independent are seeing that a potential Biden administration would be weak to defending America against China. That many of our Democratic leaders, elected officials, have been subject to and may yet still be subject to influence by Chinese nationals. We should be concerned. We should be worried. When we see that organizations like Black Lives Matter, Antifa, Democratic Socialists of America, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her squad, Bernie Sanders, are socialists who are pushing the goals of the Chinese communists, we should be worried. We should be worried that China is so confident, they are so self-assured that they have won, that they are in a position of power, that the American people and the American government are so incapable of doing anything that a Professor D. Donsheng at Renmin University in Beijing was willing and able to go on to Chinese TV and state as a fact, without fear of repercussion, at the top of America's core inner circle of power and influence, we have our old friends. And I have detailed the potential of those friends and how they have been influencing America. The question comes now, what do we do about this? And that's a tough question. I can't answer that for you. I can't tell you what we should do. Besides asking Eric Swalwell, besides asking Dianne Feinstein, asking Chuck Schumer, and asking Joe Biden, are they sure about their influences? Have they accepted money from the Chinese government, directly or indirectly? Are they sure that they have been acting in the best interest of America? Are they sure that their policies, the far left policies, the pro-socialist policies of the progressives, of the Democratic Party, is that really the best interest of America? When Americans voted on November 3rd, millions voted for Joe Biden. Tens of millions voted against Orange Man Bad. And sadly, tens of millions of Americans were denied the opportunity to understand or be aware of the consequences of those votes. But now we do. Now it's up to you to take action, to reach out to your elected officials, and to try and correct this problem. Because if we don't, if the major news media is allowed to brush this aside, if they are allowed to let you forget about this in 3 months, and that this will become just one more news story that we have covered, and in a decade will come up again, then America will be in trouble. Maybe you think I'm wrong. Maybe you don't agree with the sources. Maybe you believe the conclusions I'm making are incorrect. Maybe. And we look forward to your comments about that. But no matter what, whether you agree or disagree, we do advise you, become informed. This is something that has an impact we can't allow ourselves to not be aware of. I thank you. I look forward to speaking with you again soon, and I wish you the best.